Okay, good evening, and I would like to welcome all of you to the Florida Society for Ethical Ecotourism's August webinar. I had to think of what month it was. Um, we are happy to have special presenters with us tonight, who I'll introduce in a minute. Florida Society for Ethical Ecotourism is an organization dedicated to maintaining a professional code of ecotourism ethics in order to encourage an awareness and stewardship of Florida's natural and cultural heritage. So tonight's topic is very timely because um, we have water quality issues impacting tourism in Florida presently, and we are happy to have Abayha Thiele, who is the Southeast Region Coordinator of Citizens Climate Lobby, with us tonight. This webinar was actually scheduled for almost a year ago, and Hurricane Irma canceled it because many of us that facilitate these webinars had no power. So we apologize, but are glad that Abayha could join us tonight. And in a minute, I'm going to introduce, she's going to introduce her co-presenter, Greg Hamra, who's a climate solutionist, and I've learned so much from him in just 2 days of knowing him. So we want to just welcome you. We want you to know that we're recording this webinar because we have many members that probably are out guiding and can't join us. So we will post it to the Florida Society for Ethical Ecotourism's YouTube page in the next couple days. And I also wanted to let you know that we do have a large audience, probably the largest we've ever had for a webinar. So we would encourage you to stay muted until the time comes where you really need have a burning question. You can either type it in or unmute yourself and go ahead and because that'll happen. You just heard that feedback. My voice was coming over somebody's mic. So anyway, that is my introduction on behalf of Florida Sea. We're glad you're here. We appreciate it. This was an opportunity we felt we needed to open up to everyone, not just our members, free of charge. So we appreciate you joining us. So Abayha, I'm going to turn it over to you. And at the same time, I'm going to go ahead and share, gives Greg control of the screen.
Great. Thank you so much, Nancy. It's really a pleasure to be here tonight with everyone. And I also would like to give my thanks to Janice Hinson, who's chair of Sea's board of directors and whom I know through Paddle, Florida in Gainesville. I just want to say that this entire webinar series that the Society for Ethical Ecotourism offers is such a contribution, and it's really wonderful to be a part of it. And I also wanted to share that I something that maybe not everybody on the webinar tonight knows, that SEA was founded, the Society for Ethical Tourism, I'll refer to it as SEA, S-E-E, that SEA was founded in 1998. So that puts it in its 20th year. So happy anniversary, SEA. It's quite an accomplishment. And I also I was thinking about what SEA and Citizens Climate Lobby have in common. And I think what it is that they both offer transformative experiences for their members. And then those members can then offer those transformative experiences to others. And it just carries on. So, and personally, I really can think of no better way of establishing common ground among people than bringing them out to enjoy the beauty and serenity of nature, and also to learn from the challenges that nature offers. And I have to confess that on my own bucket list is to have the opportunity to spend time outdoors with each and every one of the eco tour providers around Florida that are members of SEA. That really is something I'm looking forward to, and I think my life will be greatly enriched by that. So that's something I'm looking forward to. So I really want to offer my heartfelt appreciation to SEA and to all its members. and especially for them bringing people together in profound ways. So thank you again for the opportunity to present this webinar tonight. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Greg Hamra, who is the chapter leader of the Miami chapter of Citizens Climate Lobby. And Greg does many, many different kinds of services to society. He wears many hats, and maybe he'll share about a few of those with you. Greg?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you loud and clear.
Are you able to see my screen? Because I was seeing somebody else's webcam. Maybe that was you, Nancy, I don't know, wearing sort of a black and white striped tank top? Somebody was.
No, that wasn't me, but I think it's not there anymore.
Okay.
It was one of our viewers, Joyce Wasserman. I'm glad Joyce could join us.
Oh, Joyce. Hi, Joyce. Okay, so y'all can see my screen though? Is that right?
Yep.
With my smiling face in the slime?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for coming, everybody. I'm Greg. In fact, am I on the screen also? My screen cam is working. Do you guys see me? Do you see that also? I don't know.
No, not live, just the photo.
Fine. Got it. Okay, good. One thing, as I was preparing for this quote unquote red tide presentation, I noticed as I wrote my name there in red letters, I kept it red from another slide deck. My last name, Hamra, coincidentally is Arabic for the color red. Just thought I'd mention that. Anyway, I am with Citizens Climate Lobby. My name is Greg Hamra. I live in Miami. I'm the group leader of what I like to call the Ground Zero chapter for South Florida. Southeast Florida is economic ground zero for the ground zero for the economic impacts of sea level rise. And I thank C for asking us, CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby, Abayha and me to participate in this brief webinar. So we're going to talk about the impacts on Florida that we're seeing of a changing climate, what we can do about it. Focusing a bit on, obviously, the big situation at hand that's getting everybody's attention. It's terrible. A little bit about me. I'm Greg. I'm a LEED accredited professional. I used to teach LEED green building, corporate sustainability, carbon accounting. I still teach climate literacy all the time. I love to teach the science, although I do know that that's not where we need to people. They might claim that it is, but sometimes there are economic concerns, anxiety over policy implications, other issues, and sometimes they might be talking about science to disguise that. And that's really a topic for a different kind of presentation, perhaps in the future, if you're interested. It's something we discuss a lot at Citizens Climate Lobby, how to overcome other people's concerns with this issue that we sometimes refer to as, quote, climate change. I don't like to use that term. I like to call it global weirding and climate chaos. And of course, we're experiencing some second and third order effects of it now in Florida. I'm with the USGBC, or US Green Building Council of Florida. That's how I got into my green building training. And later on, I met a guy named Jay Butera, Citizens Climate Lobby. He came to Florida during a climate rally, had a table, and recruited me. So I like to call Jay my recruiter and my mentor, and next thing you know, I'm the group leader of CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby Miami. There's my contact information. It's not at the end, so take a screenshot there or something if you want. I'm easy to find on social networking. I'm all over there, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. My website, hamra.net, and I'm gh@hamra.net. So there's the USGBC. As Abayha mentioned, I wear a lot of different hats. I'm involved at the University of Miami. In fact, it is the University of Miami's Abayha Center for Ecosystem Science and Policy, where CCL Miami meets regularly during our monthly meetings. We have a number of monthly meetings throughout the state of Florida. Central Florida, we have a Tampa chapter, so you can look into that. I'm with the city of Coral Gables. I'm on the Sustainability Advisory Board. I'm a Climate Reality Project climate leader, so is Abayha, and she's a mentor, as am I. We were both mentors during the training in 2015. And I guest lecture at area universities, including FIU. So I'm up in Aspen now. I'm 2 time zones away from you. For me, it's a little bit after 5. I did my first mountain biking the other day, and I'm going to talks with important people, thought leaders like Larry Fink of BlackRock, the largest asset manager in the world, and our friend Gina McCarthy, former EPA administrator. I got to meet her last week, and more about them later and their position on our policy. But first, let's talk science. My story. a little bit more about me, and this actually weaves into something I'd like you to think about doing when you have the opportunity to engage other people on this topic. Because if you come away from this talk and you just are dazzled and you think, wow, that's interesting, I'm going to go change my light bulbs and take the lint out of my dryer, or maybe buy an electric car, put a solar panel on my roof. That's fine, you can do those things. But feel-good half measures and doing less bad is not how we turn this ship of a global climate crisis. And so you can do those things, and you should do those things, and that's great, but we really need big action, and that's where I'm going to get into. But this is really, when you get into that discussion with people, it's good to sort of introduce yourself and bond with them on something that you might have in common. Now, that's difficult to do right here with this sort of technology. I'm sitting 2 time zones away, I'm looking at a white screen, and I'm telling you my story. I'm born and raised in Miami. I was born steps away from the water. I have a close connection with the water and with fish and fishing, and I love seafood. And I learned to bluefish in Long Island from my grandfather, and that's stepping it up to some halibut, and that's of course in Alaska. That's a rainbow trout in somewhere in Canada, mutton snapper, big remora. You can imagine the size of the shark that remora was hanging out. We were lucky to pull fish in. Half the fish we pulled in that day were getting chomped by the big shark down there, taking the fish after we hooked them. Of course, a nice little nurse shark there in the Keys. I used to be a diver. I used to be an avid diver. I got certified in 1976, sort of dating myself, I guess. But the point here is I don't like to go diving anymore. It is depressing for me, and this relates directly to the topic at hand. I've seen the reefs die in my lifetime. They're dying. What coral reefs need are warm water, a nutrient desert, and sunlight. A nutrient desert. If you put a lot of nutrients in the water, algae takes over, other kinds of algae, and they cover and kill the coral polyps. Water that's too hot will also kill the polyps, and that's why we have coral bleaching, a number of issues. Warmer water, ocean acidification, which we're probably not going to get into that tonight. Those are 2 culprits for coral bleaching. And of course, when it comes to just nutrients in the water, those nutrients can be sewage, nitrogen and phosphorus from a fertilizer that runs off. And so the last time I went diving was just a few years ago, and it was a cleanup dive. I will go diving if I can go down there and do some good, and we cleaned up a reef. It was fun for me to do that, but it's no longer a pleasure for me to go to the reef to gawk at the beautiful colors, because frankly, they're gone. And when it comes to fish today, I'm more or less a pescatarian, but more and more of my fish comes out of a can. And this leads me to something, if you'll bear with me, I'm going to be talking about some impacts, and they really do tie together to what's going on, and particularly on the west coast of Florida. Eating lower on the food chain is not only more sustainable, it's healthier. Eating higher on the food chain is not only less sustainable, it can kill you. Perhaps some of you are familiar with mercury poisoning. Larger fish typically have more mercury, and we'll be talking about that just a little bit. But I want to just get one thing out of the way. If you like it, then you shouldn't put a rig on it. So there's my little statement on offshore drilling. A little bit more about what I spend my time in terrestrially is not underwater, but going to Capitol Hill, talking to lawmakers, and in the top 2 photos there, we see Abayha front and center on the top 2 photos. I'm on the ends, of course. I don't know, it just worked out that way. The meeting at the top right was a Marco Rubio meeting. And I drive around in a Prius with a tag that says tax CO2. So that's where we're going, folks. Talking to lawmakers like the congressman for the southernmost district in the United States, who oversees Homestead, Everglades, and the Florida Keys. That's Congressman Carlos Curbelo, who 3-4 weeks ago just released the first piece of bold climate legislation in nearly a decade from a Republican. And this was only weeks after 1,200 of us, there's a picture of us, 1,200 of us were on Capitol Hill to talk to lawmakers, over 500 meetings with members of Congress. There's my congresswoman for more than half of my life, Ileana Ross-Lehtinen, of course, a big fan of the University of Miami, and Professor John Van Leer, who's also a professor there for, I think, 48 years. She's retiring. And so these are some of the people we meet with, and we consider them friends and climate heroes because they are bucking the party and speaking up about human-caused climate disruption when it is not a popular thing to do within the Republican Party. Of course, we do deal with Republicans and Democrats at Citizens Climate Lobby. More about CCL and how we work in a bit, and how you can get involved, because the point of this talk is to really compel you to get involved, not just sit on the sidelines and not just do personal greening activities that feel good but ultimately don't have a big effect. We don't need to just change the light bulbs, we need to change the rules. We need to change our leaders and our laws. And changing our leaders doesn't mean necessarily voting them out. It means changing who they are and what they do. And look at the progress we've made with these people, these Florida representatives and several others. So more on that in a bit. This was, I took this screenshot out of a National Geographic article about the red tide, and it's clearly it's devastating Florida's sea life. Are humans to blame? Well, that's a good question. Humans didn't create cancer. People die of cancer, but we can do things that make people die of cancer. Same thing here. We didn't create red tide. In fact, it was first discovered, first spotted by Spanish sailors in the 1500s. We're asking the wrong question if we're asking, is human activity the cause of these things? And so I'm going to quote Michael Mann here. He says that we're asking the wrong question. Asking if it causes, if climate change or these other issues are caused specifically by humans, no, that's not the right question. The question should really be, is climate change, or in the case of these algae blooms, blank, are these events more extreme because of human activity? So in the case of climate change, to read it verbatim, is climate change impacting these events and making them more extreme? And we can say with great confidence that it is. And so I'm still going to connect this to the algae issue. We have dead zones every year, bigger and smaller, off of the Louisiana coast because water with pollutants, well, nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen wash down into the Gulf of Mexico. And so I'd like to just talk a little bit, we're going to learn a little bit of terminology here, but I want you to understand how we connect the dots, how human activity and climate impacts, in particular, climate forcings, can, and in some cases are, making certain things worse. So it's not that they are caused necessarily by climate changes, but they can be exacerbated by a changing climate. A dead zone is a zone, usually it's a water body, where the oxygen is no longer in the water. And I'll be talking about how that happens in a bit. Actually, I should just do that now. What happens with these dead zones is phosphorus, nitrogen, human waste, animal waste, sewage, nutrient-rich polluted water, particularly in the case of what we see here coming down the Great Mississippi. A lot of this is nitrogen-rich water because of our farming for corn. Corn is very nitrogen hungry. And when there are a lot of rains, here's the climate impact, a lot of rainfall, those nutrients, those fertilizers that helped us get a good bounty of corn, run off into lakes and streams and rivers, and sometimes find their way into larger water bodies. So what happens is these nutrients they breed their fertilizers, and what happens is blue-green algae and other types of algae feed on these nutrients. Now think about this in a lake for just a moment. If a green algae grows on the lake, it covers up the lake, and now it's blocking sunlight to the natural flora down below, so the photosynthesis is no longer happening to the natural plants that might be down below in the lake. It's instead those algae at the top are photosynthesizing, at the top blocking the light, proliferating, growing, and we see a big green lake. In this case, green is bad, not good. Well, now what we have is, as those flora down below die and those other organisms are growing, they're taking what little oxygen is in the water already. There's not a lot of oxygen in the water, and there are fish in there and crabs. living on that oxygen. Those oxygen are sustaining the life of the natural aquatic environment. As bacteria come to eat the decaying plant life and the algae that eventually dies, those bacteria take the oxygen out of the water, and that water body becomes hypoxic, no more oxygen. So if you're in a water body like the Gulf of Mexico, the big fish swim away, or if they don't move fast enough, die, and the small stuff dies. And that's one of the things that's happening when there's not enough oxygen in the water. And there's your hypoxia written right there at the top of the screen. Back to climate impacts, because the point here is I'm not here to point fingers on who's responsible for the specific runoff from the Okeechobee. There are a number of culprits here. In fact, we should look a bit farther north into some of the agricultural farming communities north of the Okeechobee, where we're growing cows. That's where a lot of this stuff is coming from. It's easy for us to try to look for one particular culprit and put all the blame on one culprit. And the fact is, there are a number of factors here. What's making it worse is higher temperatures, for one. Okay, and this is something I just got today off the NASA website, showing that year by year, average temperatures are getting higher and higher. And that's just NASA. And now I'm talking about storms here because, and what are the same factors, some of the very same factors that are making these storms more powerful are also promoting, in some cases, exacerbating these algae blooms. And so let's talk about these storms for a minute. I first want to say that there's no science to support that there's a greater frequency of storms as a result of human-caused climate disruption. No science to support a greater number of storms. However, it is 100% true to say that these storms are bigger and more powerful because of climate effects. So if we have a warming planet, that means there's more evaporation. In dry areas where I'm sitting right now, I learned today, for the first time in Aspen history, they've instituted water restrictions. Okay, we're drying out and we have fires all over the place. Did human-caused climate change create those fires? No. Did they set the stage to make those fires a greater probability of occurring? Yes. The fire near here that disrupted my air travel a few weeks ago was set off by tracer rounds that some people illegally used at a nearby gun range. The fire began, many acres and several homes were destroyed. California just had their worst fire, whether it's arson, whether it's lightning, whether it's tracer rounds. It's not that we've had a sudden increase in that activity. What we're seeing is the ground is drier because more moisture is pulled out. As that moisture is pulled out, it comes into the sky and drops down in larger precipitation events. And so what we have is warmer oceans, which add fuel to these storms, more moisture in the air, whether it's just a major rainfall or these rain bombs we've heard of, or storms that pack more power and more moisture. Another thing that I learned recently, think about what happened with Harvey. It hung out over Houston for a long time and it was moving slowly. What I'm learning is that as the Gulf Stream is slowing down and the jet stream is slowing down, many of our storms are not moving as fast through our areas as they used to, and so they have more time to do more damage. Now, did humans create those storms? No. Did human activity set the stage for drier dries, wetter wets, and stronger storms? Yes. Multiple lines of evidence support this. Now, as these winds are shifting, as we have more precipitation, this helps worsen the algae blooms. So extreme precipitation events are definitely on the rise. Here's some data from NASA. Look at the years early on and more recent years. These are 1 in 5 year storms. We're having many, many more 1 in 5 years storms. We're seeing 1 in 200 year storms happening several times in the same year now. We're seeing things completely out of whack, like we've never seen, like projections, like typical projections have not projected, but those who've been studying climate science for years, like Dr. James Hansen and many others, have warned us that these rules are all going to be breaking in the future, and it's happening now. So we're seeing bigger, more powerful storms with more rainfall. We're seeing shifting winds. And this is what relates to the algae issue. And so there are 4 issues I'm going to talk about, because when I get to talk about the solutions, the solution I'm going to be talking about would in fact directly or indirectly help mitigate all of these immediate impacts. So the immediate impacts that have everybody's attention right now is the blue-green algae and the red tides and the red drifts with these other piles of macro algae on the shores. We have a big proliferation of sargassum all up and down the Atlantic coast, and I understand that it's coming into the Gulf Coast as well. And so we have some harmful algal blooms, which are called HABs, which are the blue-green algae, cyanobacteria, which is becoming more and more prevalent, getting a lot of press. And then we have the red tide, which has a lot of, both are actually resulting in health impacts, because as aerosols travel far inland from the coast, even you don't have to be on the coast to be experiencing health impacts from these agents. People are getting sick because of them. And the lower right, I'm going to talk about mercury. Now, that is not a climate impact, but that is a direct result of burning coal. And what happens, I'm sure many of you know that eating bigger, older fish exposes you to the potential of ingesting more mercury. King mackerel, swordfish, bluefin, those are the big 3. But bigger fish bioaccumulate that mercury in their cells because smaller organisms are accumulating it. So as big fish eats smaller fish, that's called biomagnification. And then the bioaccumulation is what happens within the one organism. And of course, there are some health impacts related to having too much mercury. I have a friend, maybe some of you know have friends, who can't eat any more fish. We have a friend who's been told by her doctor that she has mercury poisoning, and she's all full up on mercury. No more fish. She won't even have catfish now, even though that's not a high mercury fish. She just doesn't touch it anymore. She used to eat a lot of tuna fish, and she used to eat a lot of sushi, and she is quite frankly maxed out on mercury. Does anybody else know anybody who that has happened to? In fact, what I'm going to do briefly, let me see if I'm not sure if I'm able to see if anybody can raise a hand, or I'm going to look in the chat. I'm going to keep the chat window open here, so if anybody has questions for me, go ahead and type them into the chat. In fact, let's just make sure it works. Type hi or something if you want to make sure it works. And then as we go forward, I'm going to try to look out for your chats in order to keep this as interactive as possible. So I don't see anybody typing anything in the chat. Let me see. I see somebody asking, can you make me the presenter? And there's the test. Very good. Okay, thank you, Joyce. So that is working, and I just want to make sure that we have the ability to have a little bit of two-way here, because so far I'm just alone in the apartment here talking alone, and I don't see any interaction whatsoever. So it's a little weird for me. I have done webinars, but it's been a while. Well, one of the other proliferations we've had is sargassum. Not that it poisons anybody, but it does smell bad, and it's costing the city of Miami Beach thousands of dollars to come and scoop that stuff up. I believe this is happening on the West Coast as well. This is not directly climate related or necessarily related to nutrient loads. It's not entirely known how this is related, and if somebody wants information on this, there's an interesting webpage from the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Science, also known as RASMAS, RSMAS, which I just typed into the chat box. And let me see if I can. No, I can't take the link from there, but I'll share this deck with Nancy in case anybody wants it. Or better yet, if anybody wants this, I will gladly share these slides. All I want you to do is shoot me an email, and I'll type a email address for myself in the chat box, another short form of my email, one or the other, take your pick, and I'll gladly share these. And you can also pose follow-up questions to me later if you'd like, okay? And so sargassum is just another macro algae, And that is what I've learned is what is considered a red drift, and they're scooping that stuff up, and it's creating problems. It really is. There's your eutrophication off of the Louisiana coast. This is a satellite image from NASA, and again, this is a result of extra nutrients, additional nutrients, and that's what I did when I define what eutrophication is. It is simply excess nutrients that flow to water bodies. Eu means, let's see, trophic means life or nutrients. In fact, I had the etymology of it up just a little while ago, and I forget. Yeah. Eu means, Latin is for well, and trophic is nourishment. It sounds like a good thing, well nourished. Well, in this case, it's a bad thing. Too much of a good thing is a bad thing, just like you can die of oxygen toxicity. We need oxygen to live. Too much of it, we die. Isn't there a song about that? And so with that, I just want to establish the fact that human activity, both unnatural human activity, the way we do farming is not natural, okay? And we're causing this problem. We're getting a better growth on the plant side, on the farm side, but then these are unintended consequences. And so one way to fix this is to have more natural farming. One other factor, let me explain two factors that are climate related that help make this worse. Greater and stronger precipitation events, so more rain carrying the nutrients down into the water bodies, and prevailing winds. That's what's happened with the sargassum, is because of the shifting winds, it's moving those sargassum around and pushing them into areas where they haven't been as concentrated in such number over years. I believe that happened in 2011 or 2012. Yeah, there's a good question. I think that's Joyce asking. Yeah, are there differences between the causes of algae blooms in lagoons, freshwater versus saltwater? Yes, I believe the species are different. In fact, one of my articles, I have it up, it showed that in the case of an inland water body, the fresh water that fell from the earth into the lake helped break up and make that algae bloom get better. So it's that in this case, we have more rainfall. What we're looking at here, more rainfall takes the poison, right? The fertilizer washes it down into the water bodies. That creates a problem. But in some cases, the fresh water mixes the water up. So you have mixing in the water column. And obviously, it's in this case, rainwater in the sea would change the salinity a bit. But I don't think I'm not sure to what effect it's helping or hurting or affecting in any way the algae in the saltwater. But in the inland examples, the rain could actually help fix the problem. So different species, those algae blooms, there are natural algae blooms, and not all algae blooms are due to fertilizer, okay? I want to make that clear. We didn't invent algae blooms, but is human activity, nutrients in the water, sewage, phosphorus, nitrogen, exacerbating the algae blooms? Hell yeah, 100% it is. Is weather, disrupted weather, making it worse? Yes. Winds, more rain, greater precipitation events. So not the most scientific answer about the distinction between the fresh water and the salt water, but I do know that there are some differences. And so I'd like to move into really what we do at CCL, and I see the timer's ticking here. We have a growing planet. We have a lot of threats to deal with. Let me back up for a minute. There are a lot of localized, think of farming here, right? Think of this kind of stuff here. We need to be active. We need to be civically active. We need to vote. Local elections matter. Yes. What kind of policy do we have around wastewater, farms? If we're not involved and we only have the short-term profit interests talking into the ear of the policymaker, how would you and why would you expect that policymaker to stick his or her neck out to do something other than what the big money interests are asking him or her to do? They would have to be insane. But if they hear from more people who care about these issues, who are educated and take the time to learn more about these issues and to think, wait a minute, the big farm lobby may not be doing what's in the best interest of everybody. They might be doing what's in the best interest of their profits in the short term. We need to get active. And so we need to work at the policy level. Just doing an organic garden in your backyard is fine. It doesn't fix the big problem. It might make you feel good, and it's better than using poison, or what they called it in India, medicine. We had a gardener in India. I lived there for 4 years, and the gardener called it medicine, putting medicine on the plants. If you don't do that, that's great, but we need to get active. And so we're seeing play out in America I'm calling it a crisis of civic engagement or civic disengagement. And what CCL does is we realize that we need political will for a livable world. And we can help you reach breakthroughs in personal and political power. And so we are now, look, when I joined about less than 5 years ago, we were fewer than 20,000 volunteer members and something like 200 and something chapters. As of now, CCL is over 480 chapters worldwide and over 100,000 members or volunteers or supporters. And so we've really, really grown. When I went to the first lobby day in I only went in 2015. 2014, we had 600 people in 2015, 800 the next year, now 1,200 in the most recent year. We create relationships, we form relationships with our members of Congress. In fact, 40 minutes ago, 45, 50 minutes ago, I was on the phone with Corbello's office. I was talking to one of the staffers about getting him to talk at the Global Climate Action Summit. If you have a relationship, they call back, I call them, he texts me. We have a relationship. It's great. And that's something that that you all can do if you want to. I just learned how to do it. I don't mind doing it, but I had training and guidance from the people at CCL, and I feel so empowered that I'm able to do what I never thought I'd be able to do what I do. Talk to a lawmaker and get him or her to actually say yes to something and show up at a meeting and speak on behalf of meetings in South Florida. This is what happens. It doesn't, they don't do it if you don't ask, and if you do ask, they might. Without getting into a whole lot of climate science, we know that the Earth is warming. This is well established decades ago, corroborated by some of the best science that's been commissioned by companies like ExxonMobil and Shell. Some of the best studies that they did corroborated what scientists many, many years ago warned of. And so there's no dispute in the energy industry what the causes are of this, none whatsoever. The debates that we should be having are, how do we solve the problem? And it comes down to, I'll just be very clear right now as I'm looking at the clock. It comes down to, we have three choices. A, deal with these threats the way we always have, with big government regulations that put up stop signs and barriers and thresholds and speed bumps to industry, instantly and aggressively fought by industry and conservatives. Regulations. They are expensive and sometimes inefficient. And combine that with a complex patchwork of subsidies, picking winners and losers. I'm going to subsidize you, Corn, but not you.
I'm talking.
So, sorry, I heard somebody talking.
Hi,
is there a question?
Greg, Joyce has a
Yes.
question. Can you see it, or do you want me to read it to you?
No, you know what? I got to scroll down there. Oh, I see. I need to scroll.
Great.
Go on. I see. There's a Frost. There's John Ward. Okay, let me see Joyce's. I believe that it has been 14 years since we had a frost. Oh boy. I also heard that a frost would kill the algae. Is this correct? Does warmer water increase algae? Yes, of course. I forgot to say the obvious. Warmer temperatures increase the growth. For sure. I didn't know that it's been 14 years since we had a frost, and I would assume that a frost would kill the algae. I'd like to just speak to that very briefly a little bit more here. We have a number of winners and losers in our world that are reacting to the global, what I like to call human-caused climate disruption, or the military calls human-caused climate instability. Winners and losers include pine bark beetles that don't die off anymore and are decimating and tearing apart millions of acres of pine in the western United States, creating fuel for bigger fires, by the way. Ticks in the Northeast that are proliferating, not dying off in the winter like they used to, and they're finding deer that are completely riddled with ticks. So if you own a B&B in New Hampshire and people used to come to see the deer and there are no more deer, that has an economic impact on your business. Other disease vectors, vector-borne diseases, winners and losers, I'm going to call them the winners: pine bark beetles, ticks, Zika. They're finding Zika mosquitoes in Washington, D.C. and moving even farther north, where they never were before and where humans and other species have not adapted to them. And another species that I like to consider a winner, it's quite a shocking image, and I might just bring it up. I didn't put it in the slide deck. Nomura jellyfish. Nomura jellyfish are winners. They profit from the they like the more acidic ocean. Can you all see that image right there? Just give me one thumbs up if you can see it, or somebody can speak it. Those are Nomura jellyfish, and they're proliferating in the South China Sea. They're winners. There you go. I'm glad you could see it. They like the more acidic oceans. That's actually a wolf jellyfish, not a Nomura. But these are, there you go. There's a shocking photo. And so they're winners and losers. And with that, I will continue. Long way to answer a short question, I know. Sorry about that. And I'm going to keep I'm going to be completely scrolled at the bottom of the chat, and I'll try to keep an eye on the chat there. Thank you for the yes, Nancy. We're watching my time. So the fact is, the Earth is getting warmer. Like I said before, global weirding and climate chaos. The hots are hotter. We're seeing colder temperatures in some cases in places that we don't expect them to be so cold. I'll remind you of, you might remember the term polar vortex, and this is when the jet stream has become so misshapen that it brought Arctic air, well, most recently to New York and Boston, a few years ago to Atlanta, where people parked their cars on the highway and couldn't get home. Meanwhile, it was 70 degrees in Fairbanks, Alaska. That's what I mean by global weirding. We're seeing all kinds of disruption. Come on, I'm trying to transition my slides. Again, it's getting hotter and hotter. This is not in dispute. What is in dispute, but barely, is causality. Let me be very clear. When it comes to global warming, it's real, it's us, it's serious, and there are solutions. I'll say it again, it's real, it's us. 97% of climate scientists are convinced that it's us. A very, very small cross-section, they just haven't said that it's not. It's just that many of those 3% have not gone so far as to being 100% sure that it is. Go figure. This is, when it comes to scientists, this is an amazing percentage of agreement. And this study, by the way, was done by John Cook, the same guy who is the founder of Skeptical Science, and the same guy who's a friend of CCL, and the same guy who has the Consensus Handbook. So when it comes to talking to people who are not convinced of this, they might call themselves skeptics. There's a wonderful clearinghouse of facts, myths. What is it? There's a table. Facts, myths, and fallacies. That's what it is. So he describes the fact, explains what the myth is that many people repeat, and explains what the logical fallacy is. It came from Australia, the University of Queensland, and he now teaches at George Mason University. So if anybody wants information on that, I will definitely share it. He helped me prepare for, I would call it a debate or a false equivalency face-off I had with the Heartland Institute's James Taylor. It was John Cook who helped me prepare, and it was John Cook's study, among many studies, that corroborate this 97%. In fact, I'm going to bring up another image here, since I know it's working. This is out of his Consensus Handbook. Between 91 and 100%, 4 out of 7 come out to be 97%. So when I asked him, what about this 99.9 nonsense, or I didn't think it was nonsense, he says that might have been a bit skewed. So a number of studies, the most, well, it's not the, is it the most recent? No, it's not the most recent. His is the 97 that we see here. That's John Cook. In any case, back to back to the deck and let me, there we go. Come on. All right. So I'd like to just explain very briefly. These are some impacts that we see, different kinds of impacts in different places. By the way, look where it says Montana, I see the word glacier. Did anybody follow the news that Glacier National Park is on fire and they just hit their first triple-digit temperature ever? They hit 100 degrees and Glacier National Park is on fire. We're having wildfires in the Arctic also. Things are crazy. Everybody who's been studying this knows that this has to do with the use of fossil fuels and land use, but fossil fuels, and this has been, it has human fingerprints on this. Carbon 14, is it carbon 13 and 14 or 14 and 15, I forget. These are isotopes that they in fact have identified the carbon that's up in the atmosphere as having our footprint, our fingerprints. And so what do we do about it? Our solution at CCL, and this is completely consistent with what we do in many other economic areas. It's just that we have a problem doing it with fossil fuels. Given the choice between clean energy and cheap energy, ladies and gentlemen, cheap energy is always going to win out. The reality is the true costs of our use of this energy are not reflected in the price. I'll say it again. The true social and environmental costs, whether it's making these algae blooms worse. Thank you, John. It was carbon 12, 13, and 14. Thank you, John. I appreciate that. Whether it's sea level rise, crop loss, dying reefs, wildfires, the list goes on and on. Health impacts, 13,000 lives a year in the US, 4,400 a day in China die early because of coal. They're seeing a greater number of human loss. These are costs not reflected in the price of fossil fuel. Some economists call this a market failure. The fact is, we need to make the price of fossil fuels honest. And in the time that remains, I'm going to keep it very simple. Many thought leaders, many economists know that we need to make the price of fossil fuels reflect the true cost. And how can we do this in a way that doesn't kill the economy, doesn't make people more poor, and that actually creates jobs? That is exactly the plan we have. And we're not the only game in the town. There are a number of entities that are promoting a price on carbon. But you need hope. We need to focus on solutions, not concentrate only on the threats and cry ourselves to sleep. I got tired of doing that. I need to get up out of the bed and do work. And doing work means engaging those people that need to be engaged, having conversations, and forming respectful relationships with elected officials and with business leaders and with my Republican friends down the street. And I'm on the conservative caucus. I'm actually on a conservative caucus call in a few minutes. And so what we do is we go to Capitol Hill a couple times a year, but throughout the year, we write letters to the editor. We're changing opinion. We're having conversations. Many thought leaders, left, right, and center, all agree that we have to put a price on carbon. What I mean is polluting for free, treating the atmosphere as an open sewer for free, where there's no price, is not right. It is inconsistent with conservative economic principles. So our plan is very simple. There are three pillars. Place a fee on carbon-based fuels at the source, at the wellhead, at the mine, and at the port of entry. Start low so that we don't shock the system, so that industry and the whole business world can adapt over time. Increase it in a transparent and predictable way. What do you do with the money? Under our plan, and there's another plan like it, return it to you and me. Return it to every household. This is what makes it revenue neutral. The government doesn't keep the money. We call it a carbon fee and dividend. What about competing with imported goods? If John and I, say John Ward and I, make made in the USA cell phones, we instantly have a higher cost of making those cell phones if we're making them in the US. How are we going to compete with Chinese imports, or in the case of Samsung, Korean imports, or from anywhere else? The only way to do that is to impose a tariff at the border. This border adjustment would place a carbon fee on that imported good based on the carbon footprint of that good at the border, and that money would be part of our dividends. But we don't want that to stay. We don't want that situation to remain. What we really want it to do is send a signal to that country to keep the money in country and get their own carbon pricing going. And I'll tell you, it's too late for us to lead with China. I hope we can muster the sanity to follow, because China is already pricing carbon. They're testing a number of carbon pricing emissions trading systems in 7 different cities. But what that border adjustment does is 3 things. It levels the playing field for John and Greg's cell phone company. Number 2, it discourages John and Greg from up and leaving and outsourcing our pollution and doing it somewhere else. Hey, we're going to get border taxed on the way in. And number 3, and most importantly, it incentivizes other countries to follow suit. And there we have the carbon fee and dividend with the border adjustment. Who endorses this? The world's most famous climate scientist, who 30 years and 2 months ago famously testified before Congress and said that we need to stop dawdling, we need to get serious about human-caused global warming. He is on the board of Citizens Climate Lobby, Dr. James Hansen. Who else? Republican icon, 97 years old, he's still with us, Secretary George Shultz. He endorses. Who else stands by this? Environmental guru Paul Hawken a few weeks ago here in Aspen. He said this a year ago on our call. He said it again before a room full of doctors, lawyers, and Indian chiefs and industrialists during the talk that he gave, talking about his drawdown book. There's no single policy that would have a greater impact than pricing carbon on the 100 solutions listed in his book. Who else agrees? Gina McCarthy. Who else agrees? Hank Paulson. These are people I ran into last week. In fact, I agree. I like Gina McCarthy. She's all about embracing the science. And Hank Paulson is working on carbon pricing in China now. He was working on an initiative here in the U.S. with the Climate Leadership Council. So the outputs would be jobs. We would reduce emissions faster than all Obama-era regulations, more than twice as fast, create 2.1 million jobs in 10 years, 2.3 million jobs in 20 years. The lower 70% of Americans would actually come out ahead financially. They'd have more money in their pockets. There's your jobs. People would have more money to spend. It would spur the economy. And as people go to buy things, they're going to make lower carbon choices, whether they know it or not. Why? Because that carbon fee is embedded in the price tag, because we're setting that at the most upstream point in the economy. And it's not about a gas tax. It's not about taxing millions of people or companies. It's simply making the price of fossil fuels honest at the upstream point of our economy. And so without getting into all the numbers, if you would like to be involved, and I hope you will, I'm going to hand it over to Abayha to finish up. Just flying the flag here. We're a nonprofit. We're nonpartisan. We treat everybody with respect and gratitude and appreciation when we have these meetings. We have a mission to create the political will for a livable world. We need political will for climate solutions by enabling individuals like you to have breakthroughs in personal and political power. I've had mine. You're next. There's our fearless leader and our founder, Marshall Saunders. Take a look at that link at the bottom right. Take note of it. Please look at that short video when you're done. It's bit.ly, bit.ly/CCL Cavalry. Ladies and gentlemen, you are the cavalry. We've grown over the years. Let me just move to the end. We do different things: public speaking, show up to events, tabling, letter to the editor, op-eds, radio and TV. And with that, I'm just going to hand it over because we have to wrap up, and I want to give a couple of minutes to Abayha to say a few words. And there's our leadership. Very few of us are paid staff. I'm certainly not. I do this because I have to. Take it away, anybody.
Thank you so much, Greg. My goodness, you shared so much valuable information. I'm going to have to watch the recorded version of the webinar to take it all in. Oh my goodness. All gratitude to you. Thank you. Well, I thought I might just leave with a quote from E.B. White. You all may have heard it before, but I think it bears repeating, and it's apropos. E.B. White said, I arise in the morning torn between a desire to save the world and a desire to savor the world. And this makes it hard to plan the day. So personally, I find that I have to go out and savor the world, to enjoy Mother Nature and to commune with her. And I really thank all the members of C for allowing us and helping us to do that. And it's been a wonderful opportunity to be with you all. And thank you so much, Nancy.
Thank you, Abayha. We certainly appreciate you sharing time with us tonight. For everyone on the call, the recording of the webinar will be available and shared with everyone that registered, and will be posted to the Florida Society for Ethical Ecotourism's YouTube page. So follow us at floridaseed.org. We do monthly webinars such as this, and we hope to have you join us again in the future. Thank you. Thanks for attending.
Thanks, everybody.